It's been over a century since the very first Royal Enfield bike was produced. In fact, it's one of the oldest manufacturers of motorcycles that is still in production today. Right up next to Indian, of course, both developing their first production bikes in that very same year of 1901. While being a much more common bike in areas outside of the US, like say parts of Europe, all over Latin America, and of course India, where the company is based out of. In America, it's not a well-known brand, like, at all. I would even describe them to be obscure here in the US, and to come across one is more of an oddity than anything else. Royal Enfield was always something I've read about or seen in books, magazines, and of course through videos on YouTube. Only recently had I ever seen a Royal Enfield for the first time in person, which ironically was when my '88 Yamaha Vmax's transmission blew up on me mid-ride, and a very nice man in a Himalayan helped me get my bike to a safe location. Ever since that moment, Royal Enfields have become, well, somewhat of a fascination for me. Which brings me to where I am today. The Indian dealership all the way here in Elkhart, Indiana, who also sells and services Royal Enfield bikes. I'd wanted the opportunity to look at these bikes in detail for years now, and of course ride them, really experience and understand what these bikes are really about. This dealership and their wonderful staff are allowing me to do exactly that. I should point out that I am not sponsored by either Royal Enfield or Indian, though honestly the idea of that would be pretty damn cool. I don't know how anyone could say no to that, to be honest with you. Regardless, I am not obligated to give any biased or fake opinion by any means. I have to go into this with as much as an open mind as possible and give my honest-to-God thoughts and impressions of these bikes, point out both the good and the bad. So with that said, let's finally take a look at some bikes. Yes, well, the first motorcycles that I'll be checking out are the Meteor and the Classic 350. I'm going to group these two together because mechanically they're very much the same, but cosmetically different. Like all of the Royal Enfield bikes, they come in more color options than you get in a bag of M&Ms. But the Classic in particular is interesting. You see, the bike has a couple color options that more mimic that of mid-World War II motorcycles, kind of reminiscent of the matchless G3L in a way. The dealership unfortunately did not have any of these color options at the time, but I have seen them in person and they are simply stunning machines that even someone who's really not that into motorcycles will be turning their heads at the Classic. The model that I'm riding today is the Halcyon Green, which I personally love because green is my favorite color. But anyway, this particular style of bike is inspired by the post-war G2 model. Now this Meteor 350 on the other hand is in their stellar blue color option. Visually it just has the look of a no-nonsense old-school cruiser with modern touches. Unlike the Classic, it has a heel-toe shifter with more forward controls. The Meteor and the Classic have completely different instrument clusters. You see, the Classic here is, well, classic as the name would suggest. No tachometer, just a simple, straightforward, large speedometer with a much smaller LCD display below it. The Meteor, on the other hand, combines its speedometer and LCD display together as one unit, and again it doesn't have a tach. Now that separate display off to the right is actually Royal Enfield's trip navigation display. That's powered by Google Maps through Royal Enfield's dedicated app. It's called the Tripper. It's a pretty cool unit in theory. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to test it out, but I have seen a lot of people cover this in videos before, and in general, the consensus is very positive regarding the Tripper. These bikes are single-cylinder 350cc's, pumping out just 20 horsepower, with a 0 to 60 clocking in at some point. But bear in mind, these bikes are not meant to be speed demons, and absolutely no one should ever expect that from a lower displacement bike anyway. These bikes handle city streets, back roads, even lower highway speeds of 55 to 60 miles an hour with no problems. They're great bikes if you just want to go out and enjoy a nice, smooth, relaxing ride. Really enjoy the bike for what it is. It's not even a half bad choice for a starter bike if you don't exactly want something with a big engine or something that has a heavy amount of torque. These 350s are very forgiving for those with a twitchy throttle hand. Like, these bikes aren't going to give you any sort of whiplash. God forbid you accidentally twist the throttle too much. They're gentle, but not so gentle that they're painfully slow on the low end. Speaking of highway, let's touch on that. So the fastest I was able to push these bikes was maybe 72 miles an hour, and I had to give it all of its might to do so. And it did not get to that top speed in a hurry. Once you do get to 60, the bike takes damn near forever to push itself to 70 miles an hour, and even when you do, the bike doesn't exactly seem thrilled to be going that fast. So with that in mind, highway travel when you do have to go faster than 60 probably isn't something I would recommend. These bikes run at their absolute best, coasting at 45 to 60. And to some, that lower top speed might be a deal breaker, but not for me. I really don't care how big or small a bike is. I've rode a Grom and a Goldwing, for God's sakes. Two vastly different bikes. The gearboxes, I don't know how to express this in a masculine manner. They're fabulous. Just terrific, very snappy, both with up and down shifting. Smooth as butter, without ever feeling clunky. When you're shifting, everything about it feels as perfect as it could possibly get. The clutch is incredibly easy to understand with its engagement point, and it's neither too heavy or overly light feeling. The bikes were both very comfortable to ride. The seats were nice and plush, the seating position wasn't terribly different between the two. The only thing that was immediately noticeable was the foot placement, like I mentioned earlier. The Meteor has a more forward control setup, which is always weird for me being a guy that's not exactly a fan of that style, let alone the heel-toe shifter. But of course, that's entirely a personal preference. The suspension wasn't half bad either. If you're from the Midwest like me, you know damn well how terrible the roads are here. Road patches everywhere, molten Oreo cookie crumbs as temporary fixes, and of course, potholes. Tons and tons of potholes. These bikes handle them fine with no real problems at all. Then again, I wasn't purposely throwing myself into craters in the road or anything, but still, I'm impressed with how they handle. All of the Royal Enfield bikes utilize Bybri brakes, featuring ABS. Bybri is the India subsidiary under Brembo. They're very good brakes all across the board, very responsive, and I felt entirely comfortable with their performance. The Meteor and the Classic are super fun bikes. Like, I can't help but smile when I'm on these, especially with the Classic. I love everything about the Classic, and again, I don't care that it's not a fast bike. I can appreciate and still have the time of my life on something like this. Next up is Royal Enfield's take on an adventure bike. They call it the Himalayan. This bike in particular, I couldn't stop staring at, both in terms of curiosity and intrigue. Powered by a slightly larger 411cc engine that has 24.3 horsepower, it's air-cooled and it fires all of its might off one single cylinder. It weighs in at 439 pounds, which is pretty heavy for a low displacement adventure bike. For example, my liquid-cooled Kawasaki Versys 300 weighs nearly 50 pounds less than the Himalayan, without the bags and other options, of course. But keep in mind that the Himalayan ships from the factory with engine guards, a center stand, a skid plate, the tripper navigation, and the dual-channel ABS system. These features that would cost hundreds of dollars, if not over $1,000, come standard with the Himalayan. And I'm sure that's where a lot of its added weight comes from. The Himalayan does, however, have a lower seat height than a lot of other adventure bikes in its class, so that's something to keep in mind. It's a very cool, interesting looking bike. Honestly, I love it. There's just something so oddly post-apocalyptic about it. There's a uniqueness to it, and yeah, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But I'm so bored of all these modern adventure bikes looking like props out of a sci-fi movie. The Himalayan that I'm testing out today is in their Lake blue color option, which is just a real simple white and blue setup, nothing all that crazy. If you do want something a little bit more interesting, they do carry the Himalayan in a weird green digital camo that is called pine green. I'll admit, it's not my favorite. Wish they had it done in a urban digital camo. I feel like it would make more sense visually for the bike, but who knows, maybe one day they will. So what is the Himalayan like to ride? It's kind of weird, but not in a bad way. As I was riding, I kept thinking to myself, okay, wow, this thing is nowhere near as heavy as I expected it to be. It's an agile bike, it's easy to manhandle, and it's also much more capable in traffic due to its slightly larger, yet torquier engine. It's technically faster than the 350s, but it doesn't have that much higher of a top speed. It's entirely capable of going 75 miles an hour, if not higher. If you have the wind behind you, you're going downhill, and you weigh as much of a wet sack of doorknobs. And yet, I still don't know if I would ever recommend 70 plus mile an hour traffic on the highway. It can be done, but it's not really best suited for it. The rider position is entirely fine. It's a very natural feeling. It's about as comfortable as most adventure bikes typically are, which means not bad, but not great either. I would imagine that after an hour's worth of riding, you may want to take a break or two. The suspension is on the stiffer side, which I'm sure can be adjusted to soften things up a little. As it is, the way I'm riding, it's stiff enough to where I can feel a lot of the imperfections on these crap Midwestern roads. The bike's dash is entirely different from the others. It has a tachometer, speedometer, a separate gas gauge, and even a compass, which is kind of a rare sight to see. It also has that tripper navigation display installed, which seems very appropriate for this bike, all things considered. Obviously, one of the bike's main selling points is that it's a dual sport, able to travel on and off-road, which it does very well, especially since they threw dual sport tires on the bike. I know that sounds so stupid of me to point this out, but you wouldn't believe how many dual sports and adventure bikes I've seen stocked with street tires straight from the dealership. It's maddening. The Himalayan also has that 5-speed gearbox, and it kinda pisses me off, but not for the reason you might think. The gearbox and the clutch are so good that I wish I could somehow put this same setup onto my Versys 300. Not that the Kawasaki's is bad, not by any means, but these 5-speeds are some of the best I've ever used. The clutch, the way it shifts, the transmission in general is as perfect as I could ever imagine from a stock motorcycle. The only thing I could really point out as a possible negative about the Himalayan is that it's very cold-blooded. Like, it is not a bike you can just turn the key, jump on, and go. It takes a little while to warm up. It actually stalled on me when I was leaving the parking lot because I made the mistake of not letting it warm up enough. Despite it being fuel injected, like all of these Royal Enfield bikes are, the Himalayan behaves almost entirely like a carbureted bike. In fact, all of the Royal Enfield bikes, even the ones I have yet to talk about, remind me a hell of a lot of older carbureted bikes, even though they're not carbureted. It sounds totally crazy, I know, but if you've ever been on a 70s or 80s bike, you'll understand what I'm talking about when you jump on a Royal Enfield. I kinda like the Himalayan. I didn't know really what to make of it at first. I was kinda skeptical about it, if I'm being brutally honest, but this seems to be a perfect example of a bike that grows on you with time. It's not the fastest bike in the small displacement category, not by a long shot, but that's alright. It's not meant to be. It's a solid bike. It'll get you to where you want to go, and do it well. I can see why these bikes have such a cult following in the US and why they are much bigger in countries that have more dirt roads or unpaved ones in general. And honestly, if that's your thing, and you really don't need a bike with a faster, larger engine, maybe look into the Himalayan. Give it a test ride or two. For just around $5,300, why not? It's not even a bad deal. Our last two bikes in the lineup utilize Royal Enfield's 650cc engine platform. They are the Continental GT and the Interceptor. Now, like with the Classic and the Meteor, both of these bikes are mechanically the same, but cosmetically very different, and same goes with the rider position between the two, which I'll touch on in a moment. Like I said, they're 650cc engines, parallel twin-cylinder engines at that. They put out 47 horsepower, so double that of the previous bikes I've covered. First, let's touch on the GT, a heavily inspired cafe racer back when they first took off in Britain during the 60s. You got your clip-on style handlebars, bar end mirrors, a fly screen, a flat seat, all with an aggressive leaned-in rider position. This particular bike is actually a 2020 pre-owned bike with an Ice Queen color option. It's not any different mechanically from a brand new 2022 model. They also no longer have this Ice Queen color option, but no worries, there's plenty of others to choose from. The Interceptor, on the other hand, is based off the old Royal Enfield 750 Interceptor from back in the 60s. This one is in the Baker Express color option. The Interceptor is a much more ergonomic and relaxed setup compared to its GT counterpart. It's an easygoing bike that a majority of riders can get on and be entirely comfortable with it, no problems, thanks to its more natural upright riding position. The GT fits a completely different crowd, like someone with back, joint problems, or doesn't get into the whole aggressive leaned forward stance. Look elsewhere. You may love the design, may love the way it looks. It's cool as hell, don't get me wrong, but you won't be happy with it after a while. These GTs are for those who love a similar rider position of, say, a sport bike. It's incredibly similar in that regard. The 650 twin-cylinder engine is no slouch. It's certainly a night and day difference compared to that of the 350 and the Himalayan's 411 engine. It's quick, and you definitely have much more power in your hands with these bikes, but it never gets intimidating. I believe the 0 to 60 is around 6 seconds. I'm sure with enough practice you could shave off half a second, if not a little bit more. It's got plenty of torque and power behind the engine to handle whatever you throw at it. Overtaking in traffic is done without even trying. Highway speeds of over 70, not a problem on these bikes. In fact, these bikes are more comfortable and stable on the highway than I was really anticipating. I could easily see myself riding these at high speeds for long periods and being entirely comfortable with the handling. These bikes are outfitted with a 6-speed gearbox, which feels entirely like the 5-speed in terms of how it shifts and how nice the clutch is to operate. I went into this thinking because I love cafe racers that the GT would be my favorite, but no. The Interceptor was a bike that took me by complete surprise. It's a bike I flat out fell in love with. The upward rider stance of the Interceptor with its ergonomics made operating the bike not only super easy, but I had a blast riding it. The GT, I do have to admit that one was the hardest for me to ride. Not by any fault of the bike, but simply due to me having so many extensive surgeries on my feet last year that I'm technically still recovering from as we speak. Long story, not gonna get into it. Anyway, both bikes are amazing in their own way, and what it really comes down to the most is what you are comfortable with. Styling is one thing, and if I was going strictly off styling, then I would absolutely snag a GT in a heartbeat, but I couldn't ride it for long periods of time. After maybe 30-40 minutes, my left foot would be in so much pain I'd probably just saw the thing off. Where the Interceptor, I could ride comfortably for hours and hours and have a smile on my face the entire time. If you're wondering why I didn't talk about reliability, well, that's because I can't. Being that they're all new bikes, with the exception of the GT, it would be completely pointless for me to bring it up. That's like buying a new car, driving it 1,500 miles in 1 year, and telling your friend it's the most reliable car you ever owned. Maybe if I had a bike with 20,000 miles and its entire service history, then I could bring up reliability. But in a video like this, it's entirely pointless. So that, my friends, is the Royal Enfield lineup. and my first impressions of each available model here at the dealership. They are a lot of fun, and affordable as hell. They range from the upper $4,000 mark to around $6,000, and let's keep this in mind. All these bikes come with a 3-year unlimited mile warranty, which is damn near unheard of any motorcycle company. If nothing else, I would highly suggest that you give them a look. Find them at a dealership near you, check them out. It doesn't hurt to at least give them a test ride and see what you think for yourself, especially if you want a bike that's different from the norm. Again, I want to thank Indian Motorcycles of Elkhart for allowing me the opportunity to make a video like this. I honestly had the time of my life making it, from beginning to the bittersweet end. I hope in the future to continue making more motorcycle related content, maybe doing a full-length video on certain bikes like the Classic or the Interceptor. I'm certainly open to whatever the future holds for me. As long as it's not more surgeries, I'm over that. But no, seriously, thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, take care everyone.